Good evening, my friends. Good evening and welcome, and I thank each of you for being here this evening. Tonight we celebrate Constitution Day with the help of one of the nation's preeminent public opinion pollsters and proud son of Utica, New York, John Zogby. Before I turn things over to Professor Matt Chick, who will introduce our speaker, I want to say a few words about the importance of this day and the organizations sponsoring this event. Constitution Day is a time to remember just how important our Constitution is and how fortunate we all are to live in a democracy. In the United States, we celebrate our document, our piece of paper that we call the Constitution. But today we might pause for a moment to think about the symbolism that the Constitution embodies. In part, it is a document that reflects our constituting ourselves. That is, our coming together for the shared purposes of collaboration, a commitment to working together to solve each other's problems, a belief in basic freedoms, in fundamental rights, and a commitment to the rule of law. It's a time to remember that we can also reconstitute ourselves as new, more diverse, unique, and dynamic people that have even more shared commitments, but believe that working together toward those commitments is a goal worth pursuing. And tonight, as we hear from one of our country's most astute students of politics, we remind ourselves that elective office can and should be a noble calling, one that I hope will call out to many of the students in this room in the years to come. This evening, we also remind ourselves that public service, humbly and genuinely encountered, is the highest form of citizenship. One of our key sponsors for John Zogby's visit is TEDx Oneonta, and we're honored to partner with this group. TEDx Oneonta was established in 2017. And this year it will host its 7th annual Ideas Change Everything event at the Foothills Performing Arts Center on Friday, October 18th. The goal of TEDx Oneonta is to bring people together, to explore new ideas, and to show that Oneonta and Central New York are places where innovation leads the way. The other organizing force behind tonight's program is the Hartwick Institute of Public Service. Launched just over a year ago at our Constitution Day event last year, our Institute of Public Service is a nonpartisan organization focused on engaging young people in our democracy and inspiring a new generation of public servants. The programming of the Institute is helping remind young people and all of us that being involved in our democracy and in government is indeed noble work. It is valuable work. And also, being involved in our democracy can and should be fun. As many of you know, we lost one of our community's most committed public servants this past summer, Senator James Seward. Senator Seward played a key role in the creation and naming of the Institute of Public Service. He was also one of the inaugural members of the Institute's Leadership Council. He represented all the highest values of public service and found such great joy in the work of elective office. We are pleased to announce this evening that we are honoring his lifelong dedication to public service and commitment to strengthening our community by launching the Senator James Seward Public Service Internship, a competitive paid summer internship with the hopes of inspiring and helping young people follow in his footsteps. He will always be a great alumnus of Hartwick College. Finally, we also want to thank the leadership of Student Experience, the Office of Civic Engagement for supporting tonight's program, including the fantastic reception we will be having following John Zogby's address. Thank you for coming out and joining us and taking a moment to celebrate our Constitution and our democracy. I now invite Professor of Political Science Matt Chick to come to the podium.
Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. It's a fantastic turnout. I am Matt Chick. I'm an assistant professor in political science, and I am also the co-director of the Institute of Public Service, and I'll be kind of talking out of that role mostly tonight. But before I get to introducing in a little bit more detail our distinguished speaker, distinguished guest speaker, I have 4 kind of items of business to go over for you. I'll try to do that as fast as I can. So the first one I'd like to just announce, and hopefully if you've been on this campus, if you're a student on this campus, you've seen last week in conjunction with the actual Constitution Day, which was sometime last week, it's not officially this date, we started 6 weeks of voter registration. We had a voter registration drive. It will continue all the way up for the next 4 or 5 weeks. We will be outside of comms. If you, as we always say, we don't care who you vote for, we just care that you're registered to vote. So please stop by, see us. If you need help registering, come to comms, come to see Professor McKinney, Professor Elder, myself. We will help get you registered to vote. We'll help you request an absentee ballot. We really like to see as many people on this campus as possible participating in this upcoming election. Item 1. Item 2, on your way in, you had a look at a lot of entries into what was our inaugural voter inspiration contest. This voter inspiration contest was co-sponsored by the Institute of Public Service, as well as Hartwick's chapter of the National Political Honor Society, which is Pi Sigma Alpha. Professor Elder co-chairs this branch. It was also funded by a grant from Civic Engagement from that Pi Sigma Alpha group. So this is our first year doing it. We had a lot of amazing entries. They were really creative. The only parameter is, sorry, I'm having a tough time telling if I'm getting into this microphone. Is it okay? Yeah, thank you. We had, the only parameter was do something creative that you think would help get your peers involved in voting or inspire your peers to get involved in this election. And we received poems, we received pieces of art, we received posters, we received flyers. Again, they were all sort of streaming on your way in, and they'll be displayed somewhere else. We're still working on that, at least up until the election. So what I'd like to do right now is announce the winners of that contest. We have 3 winners and 2 honorable mentions. If you are the student who wins and you are in the audience, we would like you to stand up, and then we're going to clap for everybody at the end. So in kind of reverse order to build suspense. 2 honorable mentions are Josie Becker and Sarah Hannah Langdon. 3rd place, Jack York. 2nd place, Lumi Decker. And 1st place, Cooper Cohen. Amazing. Thank you all so much. And as they say, the checks are in the mail. We're working on getting those processed for you. For all you students out there who didn't enter, didn't know about that contest, or entered but didn't win this time, my 3rd announcement is the launch of our next competition, which is the Stephen Green Essay Competition. There were flyers outside on the table. We'll make sure to advertise that much more widely and broadly as well. But the gist there is you have to do something a little bit more writing. However, the prize pool is much greater. There's going to be over $20,000 gets given away in those essays. So take a look at that flyer, be on the lookout for more information, and same deal as with everything else. If you have any questions, talk to me, talk to Professor Elder, talk to Professor McKinney. We'll announce the winners of that in the spring. Okay, fourth and finally, I would be remiss if I didn't mention one other thing that was on that table up there, which is that QR code. If you are interested in or are excited about events like tonight, essay competitions, voter registration drives, and a whole range of other activities, the Institute of Public Service relies solely on outside funding and donations. And currently, we have a really generous offer right now from an alumni who's matching all donations for the next 4 years. It was a 5-year total, but we're already a year in, for $50,000 a year. So anything that you donate basically gets doubled. You get a match gift. So again, if you don't want to scan a QR code, but you do want to donate, talk to me, talk to Professor Elder, talk to Professor McKinney. We'll help get you sorted out. Okay, now finally, I'm delighted tonight to welcome back both to the area and to Hartwick's campus, John Zogby. John, the Zogby Poll and the Zogby International Poll have been absolute polling essentials nationally, but most especially probably here in New York for at least the last 30 years. His work and analysis has appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, just to name a few. And he himself has appeared on NBC, BBC, ABC, the CBC, and a whole lot of other acronyms that I didn't have time to list. As you'll get a little bit of a taste this evening, John is also a prolific author. Beyond the Horse Race, out just this month, is his third book, which includes a first with a co-author, Joan Snyder Cool, and this is all on top of regular columns in the Washington Examiner, as well as frequent contributions to Forbes.com and the Huffington Post. At least a little while ago. And I tell you all this information about him, not only because it's one's job as a introducer of a keynote speaker to do so, but also because it's the combination of these two elements, for me, the methodological sophistication of Zogby polling and John's ability to talk about polling results that really sets him apart. That is, on my view, at any rate, what gives John and Zogby polling its staying power and prestige isn't merely precision, although, of course, we want precise polls too, but it's how we, the American public, are actually able to make sense out of those top-line poll numbers, and those that go a little bit deeper, those crosstabs, and those prediction models after John's done talking us through them. And so with that, I'll let him talk us through some of that stuff. So I'll turn it over to John, who's going to talk to us tonight about just this issue, the 2024 election. What are the polls really saying?
That was very nice. Thank you. My second time here. Hartwick Institute of Public Service, Laurel, Zach, Matchik, thank you very, very much for your kind invitation. Dan Butterman from TEDx Oneonta, you're there somewhere, raise your hand, thank you. Professor Mullen, President Mullen, formerly retired Professor and President Mullen. All of the former mayors of Oneonta who are here in the audience, John Nader and Kim Muller, and friends and students. Students can be friends, but there is so much turbulence and disruption and conflict, but the one thing that is in equilibrium in this country at this moment is the election of 2024. Today, Real Clear Politics average has Kamala Harris leading by 2.2 percentage points. A little skewed because in the last 7 or 8 polls that have been done, she's actually leading by 3 or 4 points. That is not enough for a national victory. What you need to know is that given the skew of our electoral college, the excess votes that come from winning California and New York and Illinois, millions of extra votes, that a Democrat typically has to lead by close to 4 percentage points going into Election Day. in order to really win the election. There are 7 battleground states. There is the southern rim, which is Nevada and Arizona, all the way over to Georgia and North Carolina. And then there's the northern wall, and that's Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Those are extremely important because that's where almost all of the money is going to be spent between now and Election Day, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. I got to tell you that normally, thank God in my past, I used to travel to all of the battleground states, and I couldn't wait to get to non-competitive New York back home, because the elections make you pine for Billy Fusillo and for your furniture store going out of business for the umpteenth time, and so on. But the bottom line is that today, in 5 of those 7 states, Harris leads, but her lead is not greater than 1.3, 1.4 percentage points. Trump leads in 2 of those states, and his lead doesn't reach 2 percentage points. So we are in equilibrium, well within the margin of sampling error. And can anything happen? Oh my God, anything has already happened. How many more anythings can we possibly have? And there's about 45 days to go. Just think of the anythings that have happened in the last 45 or 50 days. So all predictions are off. If any of you came here tonight and were ready to go downtown and to see a bookie and to place your bets, you're not getting it from here. So what does the equilibrium mean? Well, in normal elections, it means a close election. Kennedy-Nixon, very, very close, right? In this election, it means a war of 2 different worlds and a constant war of words. And sandwiched somewhere in the middle are undecideds, who are genuinely undecided. Now, some people, who travel in political circles say, well, how can anybody really be undecided? Well, that's because they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Waking up in the morning, getting ready for work, making sure that the kids are off to school, working a second or a third job, and God knows when they come home at night and eat their dinner, they don't want to hear from Rachel Maddow, for Christ's sake. God, if we have to argue, and Fox too, all right? If we're going to argue and hate, keep that within the confines of your own family. You don't need to turn the television on for it. What's happening in this election? I'm going to give you a little historical background that I think is important. We polled the razor-thin 2000 election, Al Gore versus George W. Bush. It was tied. It was so tied, I was polling for NBC News. It was so tied on Sunday that I was talking to Tim Russert on the phone. He was the political bureau chief and Meet the Press moderator. He was overseeing the polling. He called me from his son's soccer game. He says, what do you got? I said, well, I've got Gore edging closer and closer. And I said, I'm going to throw in a question, and I'm going to call you tomorrow. And so I put a question in the poll. It said, you live in the land of Oz, and there's an important election for mayor of Oz. And it's between the Tin Man, who's all brains and no heart, and the Scarecrow, who's all heart and no brains. Are you folks following me here? Well, damn it. The next day at noon, I'm looking over the results. 46.2 for the Tin Man, 46.2 for the Scarecrow. I called Tim Russer and I said, I have no damn idea what's going to happen. But that was only part of it. The other part of it is, we all know what happened in that election. If you don't, I don't care if you read it, just buy my book, okay? But it's in there. 3 weeks after the election, there is still no decision. And Reuters, who I polled for along with NBC, the Washington bureau chief said, let's call Gore voters. And let's call Bush voters. This is right before Thanksgiving, after the election. And let's ask a very simple question. To Gore voters, if George W. Bush becomes president of the United States, will he be the legitimately elected president of the United States? And same thing, call Bush voters and ask if Gore becomes president. And don't hold me on the exact numbers, because I got no notes. But when we asked Gore voters, almost half said that Bush would be the legitimately elected president. And about 1 in 5 said he would not be legitimate. And I didn't think that was any reason for cheering at all. We're not talking about, would you oppose him, would you hate him? We're talking about legitimately. Is this election legitimate? We asked Bush voters, and 2 out of 3 Bush voters said that if Gore became president, he would not be the legitimately elected president of the United States. And that's when I knew Al Gore is not going to walk into that situation where 2/3 of the opposition party don't even declare his legitimacy. So why am I getting into all that? That was 2000. 3 years later, I worked with a colleague at Catholic University, John White, and we did a very unique poll on American values and behaviors. And we took the so-called red states. Those are the states that voted for Bush. Even some like New Hampshire by a few thousand votes, a few hundred votes in New Mexico. And the blue states, those who voted for Gore. And we asked questions and discovered 61% of those who lived in a red state carried a firearm. 35% in the blue states carried a firearm. A majority, overwhelmingly in the red states, said, God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and watches over me and this planet. About 31% of those who lived in blue states. And on, whether it was abortion, reproductive rights, or whatever, we were 2 separate and distinct cultures, but the hostility was percolating to the surface, and that's where we're at. It hasn't just percolated to the surface, it's blowing over. And so, whereas ordinarily, I would talk to you about what will happen on Election Day, what will happen on Election Day this year is, I don't know what. I'm worried about what happens 1 month or 2 months after Election Day. And I honestly believe, this is speculation, I know, on my part, but I honestly believe that this time around, I don't believe if the race is close and Trump is the winner, that Democrats will accept the outcome. And that is a crisis in our Constitution, which you were talking about, and that is a crisis in our democracy. And I'll get into what I think are the prescriptions a little bit later. But I want to talk about this election and how to read the numbers. So when you see 1.1 leads or 0.7 leads, you know that that's well within the margin of error, which are usually about plus or minus 3 or 4 percentage points. And you know then that it can go either way. But these days, when there's 1 and 2 percentage points, and we talk about an event that will cause a bump for one candidate or another, first is you need to know the era of big bumps is over. But you also need to know that any little bump that can produce a couple of extra points for one of the candidates can cause that candidate to jump into the, quote, lead. And so, yes, Kamala Harris got a bump from her debate, riding very favorably after a honeymoon of 4 or 5 weeks that she took advantage of. And yes, then Donald Trump got a bump, putting him into a tie in several polls and moving into that slight, still in quotes, lead in battleground states after the second assassination attempt. So, with that said, we're at equilibrium. No one is really leading. And that's not only in the popular vote, that's in the Electoral College as well. So, the campaign strategy for both sides when Joe Biden was still in the race was a very simple strategy. And that is, on the part of the Democrats, don't worry so much about the southern rim. Worry about it, but understand that if Joe Biden had lost Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia, he could still win the presidency by winning the northern wall, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, but that would get him, providing all the red states stayed, other red states stayed red, all the other blue states stayed blue, that would get Joe Biden to 268 electoral votes. You need 270 to win. So he would then have to win 2 blue dots. The first congressional district in Nebraska, which is Omaha, first congressional district in Maine, which is Portland, that would get him to 270. And wow, he couldn't get past the age and mental acuity issue. But if you'll recall, folks were saying in inner circles, oh my God, we can't have Kamala. She's deadly. People hate her, and they hate what she never did on the border, which was to resolve that issue. Anyway, that took a lot of persuasion. It wasn't just trying to persuade Joe Biden to drop out of the race. It was also trying to persuade, how do you handle this transition? So the transition was made. Harris is in the race. What does she provide? A fresh face, a different demographic that is attuned to a democratic demographic. And she changed the conversation completely. So now the conversation was not going to be age and mental acuity, except in reverse on Donald Trump. In the process, during that 4 or 5 weeks, and look, yes, I'm a Democrat, okay? But boy, did Kamala Harris get a free ride when she got into the race. Why? Because networks, newspapers, mainstream media, who don't control our lives, but they control our news agenda to a great degree, hate Donald Trump, and he hates them. And they both cultivate it, that hatred. But with that said, she got very nice coverage, and what she was able to do was bring Democrats back into the fold. So let me illustrate it. Biden, at the time that he left, was polling in the high 50s to mid 60s among black voters. Dems usually get 90% of black voters, or close to it. Hillary got 88%, and that wasn't enough. But Harris has moved that into the low 80s. Donald Trump, we'll see in a second, is overperforming among blacks. But still, she brought a lot of blacks back home. Latinos. Barack Obama got 67% of the Hispanic vote, 2008. He got just about the same, give or take a couple of points, in 2012. Hillary did well among Hispanic voters, and Joe Biden did too, in the 60s. That was back in 2020. In 2024, Biden is polling low to mid 40s among Hispanics. So is Trump. In a few polls, Trump is actually out polling Joe Biden. Kamala Harris has brought it back up into the low 60s in terms of support. Now, we get to the third group, young voters. So 18 to 44 is what I'm looking at very carefully. That includes Gen Z, 18 to about 27 years of age. 28 to 44 includes millennials. Looking at them, and I'm seeing that they are so disenfranchised, so disappointed, so angry. They're bothered, obviously, number one, by the economy and having careers and futures stalled. They're bothered by inflation. Everybody is. Inflation hits everybody, unlike unemployment. They're bothered by inaction on climate change, particularly with Gen Z more so than with millennials, extremely bothered by Gaza and what is perceived to be genocide at Gaza. And so Biden was just not their guy. When Harris got into the race, tempered her language a little on Gaza, promised a new direction, but really the same direction, but different language on the economy. And above all, she was the point person on reproductive rights. Now, why is that important? Well, first of all, Biden was only polling in the high 40s among young voters, that whole package, whereas Obama had gotten 66%. 66% of younger voters in 2008, 61% again in 2012. Hillary, 61%, 60% in 2016. You just couldn't have somebody as a Democrat polling that low. In addition to that, when you consider that the younger you get with the group, with the age cohorts, the more non-whites you're talking about as a percentage, that means that there had been a deficit among young voters of color. She has started to bring them back into the fold in the high 50s, but again, like blacks in general, not near where the Democrat needs to be. But that has brought her to equilibrium. So, what do I read into all of this? I think if you really want to watch the dynamics of this campaign from now until the end, you'll see Kamala Harris talking a little bit more about climate change, a whole lot more about reproductive rights. And that is simply because she needs young women voters. And let me tell you historically what that means. In 2012, Barack Obama and Mitt Romney were at equilibrium. You know, sometimes you'd see Romney go up a bit. Obama blew the first debate, for example. Other times you'd see Obama go up a little bit, but they always were neck and neck. Obama was underperforming among young voters considerably in 2012. And then the weekend before the election, the dam burst. And you saw younger voters overall going from 51% support to Obama to 55%, by Saturday 58%, by election day 61% support. Not quite what he got in 2008, but good. Enough to put him into leads in the battleground states. But if you looked at my aggregated polling, and you look then at the exit polling on election day, it was the 73% of young women voters' support that put Obama over the top. And that has got to be the model for Kamala Harris. So we got Donald Trump in the race. And what are you seeing from Donald Trump? You're seeing him overperforming among black voters and among Hispanic voters and even among young voters. There's some overlap there. And where you see Donald Trump doing well, he had been at 22% of support among blacks, which is double what a Republican normally gets in a presidential race. Now it's dissipated a little bit since Kamala Harris has gotten in, but it's still high teens support. But what's really important to note is that it is black men, young black men, who are supporting Trump. Now, some are supporting Trump because Trump is angry and they're angry. Others are supporting Trump because they can't get started in their lives and in their careers. Still others are supporting Trump because they're angry. There has been so much focus, they feel, on girls and on women that somebody forgot about the boys. And so what are statistics to some is reality to others. What am I talking about? Reading scores. Young black girls, poor white girls increasing, young black men, poor white men going down. Reading scores at the third, the fifth, the ninth grade levels, applications to college, admissions to college, actual college students, earning power, and the perception is I'm falling behind. And I'm not just falling behind, the girls are doing better than I am, and that cuts right at the very traditional definition of what it is to be a man. And so one way to look at Donald Trump's campaign and J.D. Vance's campaign is that this is a guy campaign, if there ever was one. Go back a couple of weeks and look at what they're saying. And realize who they're saying it to. And yes, they're getting women along the way, but it's the guys, the traditional values the anger and the rage. So, let's talk a little bit about polls. I don't predict. I never did. I suggest. I hint. But I don't predict. Sometimes I've suggested and hinted very nicely, thank you, and other times I've been in a fetal position for a few days after Election Day, sucking my thumb. But the fact of the matter is, what I do is capture what we do, is capture a trend. Don't look at a poll today and say, oh, she's going to win, or no, she's going to lose. You don't do that. This is a snapshot of a moment in time, and then follow that trend line. If I need to lose 20 pounds by Election Day, I happen to need to lose 20 pounds by Election Day. I'll get on the scale today. How am I doing? I'll get on the scale a little bit later. How am I doing? Maybe I won't get on the scale if I can't walk through the door anymore. I kind of realize. But I will keep getting on the scale. But is that going to predict that I lose the 20 pounds on Election Day? No. It's just going to tell me where the trend line is. I'm going to suggest to you that my profession is the kind of profession that starts every political campaign with things like, well, you can't believe the polls. And here's a new poll, if you could believe it, but we're not going to believe it, but we're going to report it. We get bashed. In 2016, I still get it. And I didn't poll that election, incidentally. I was kind of between companies. So I can be objective about the polling industry, including some of the a-holes in the industry that I really hate. It's very liberating. But the polls were right in 2016. They were right. And this is where it went wrong. It was those folks interpreting the polls, especially those who should know better, that were looking at the polls the wrong way. So let me give you the examples. If you were to look at the Sunday, Monday, 2 Sundays or Mondays prior to the election of 2016, and you looked at the battleground states at that point, you would see Hillary leading by 11, Hillary leading by 10, Hillary leading by 9 in most of those battleground states. The famous Comey letter came out that really cut her down. And then, as you watch the polls, or at least as I watched the polls, I saw those leads in every battleground state go from 11 to 9 as the days passed, to 7 to 5. In North Carolina, she went from a 9-point lead to a 1-point deficit, and she lost it. Now, the wrong way to interpret the polls is to look at the day before the election and say, ooh, she's leading by 2, she's leading by 3, she's leading by 1, she's got a chance, she's tied. The right way to look at the polls is to look at the trajectory and to say 11 to 9 to 7 to 5 to 3, 2 days before the election. Something's happening here, and the trend is against her. I wrote a piece in Forbes, noon on Election Day. You know, the Javits Center in New York, they had a big, 10,000 people were there. They had a glass ceiling. They were going to bomb the hell out of that glass ceiling, you know, because Hillary was elected president. And I wrote, if anybody tells you they know what's going on for sure, don't believe them. I don't see it yet. Because it was a gross misreading of the trend lines in that poll, in those polls. So, what do I look at? I look at trend lines, but I'm very careful to not mix and match pollsters. Look at Rasmussen's trend line. Look at the others' trend lines. And watch them and see where they're going. Rasmussen may start with a bigger Republican lead, but if it's dissipating, something's going on. Others may start with a big Democratic lead, and sometimes they do. I think a lot of my colleagues oversample the number of Democrats in polls, and therefore are misleading. But capture that trend. Secondly, I look at demographics. The traditional ones, age cohorts. I look at the marriage gap. Married women, much more conservative than single women. I look at race, of course. I look at race and age together, of course. I look at the Catholic vote, which is kind of interesting because there is no Catholic vote. There are Catholics who vote. But still, it averages out to be kind of a bellwether. I don't know how many people in this country say, oh, Francis wants me to vote this way. If you see them, send them over to me, okay? So I look at that, but then I also create my own demographics. So a few years back, I wrote a book about tribal analytics, neo-tribes in the United States. I identified 11 neo-tribes, not on the basis of demographics, but on the basis of how people identified themselves. There were 24% overlapping all kinds of demographics and other behavioral patterns. I call them the persistents. They were the ones who, when I asked open-ended, what are the two most defining events in your life? And they named at least one deep personal tragedy. The loss of a child, a divorce, a broken relationship, some kind of hurt. Tell me, those are people, they live with that. They persist through it. It drives how they think, and maybe even how they vote. Uncle Joe won the election in 2020, not the least of which reasons is because there were persistents out there who said, oh, my God, terrible accident and the loss of your eldest son through devastating brain cancer. There were the largest group, the land of the free. These are the libertarians. Mainly Republican, but not exclusively. Don't tread on me. The happy hedonists. Don't raise your hands. Eat, drink, and be merry, and I vote. There was the God Squad. One of the fascinating things to me in researching and then writing the book and numerous articles about it was the degree to which there were what I called border crossings. That 18% of the happy hedonists agreed with the God Squad on the environment. The God Squad would say, I don't like man's stewardship of God's earth. The happy hedonists would say, I'm worried about the future of this planet. There are so many examples of overlaps and potentials for bringing people together through common language. There just is not the will to do it in this atmosphere. So let me end by talking to the Gen Z. I'd like to say it was named after me, but... Oh, yes, it was named after me. You are Generation Zogby. Raise your hand. 18 to 27. There you go. Thanks, Zogs. That's the short. That's what you're going to be known as from now on. You have a destiny, and I'm not overstating it, and I've said it hundreds of times before. You have a destiny because you're not steeped in our crap. You're not steeped in the way we do things. We are the but generation. Oh, yeah, that's a good idea, but... We're the but generation. Yeah, that's a good idea, but I got to move that up the line. We got to go to corporate. We got to go to the hierarchy, to the pinnacle. You guys confront problems and solve problems, and you do it horizontally and equitably. You focus on problem solving and consensus building. I'm really upbeat on that. My generation, we marched for civil rights. And 81% of us, baby boomers, were white. We were marching for them. But what I like about Gen Z, who are split evenly, white and non-white, is that you're marching for us. Many of you are bi and multi-racial and ethnic. Many of you carry in the palm of your hand your social media, and part of your network are people in sub-Saharan Africa, in Asia, in Brazil. I love the fact I called millennials our first globals, our first global citizens. And you guys have carried it forward. You are engaged. And I like that. I like it very much. That is the one thing that gives me hope for the future. And that eventually, let me tell you right now, I'm 76. I'm not going to run for president in 2028. Okay, that should give you some encouragement. But maybe, somebody clapped? That alone makes this memorable for me. No, but the bottom line, seriously, is that you have a destiny to fulfill. We are in the middle of a revolution. Everything is changing. Our familiar institutions are crumbling. It's not just politics. It's not just political parties and government. It is the church. It is the brick and mortar educational institution. It's the way we teach and the way we learn, the way we work. We will know that artificial intelligence has taken over when the first robot says, "You really want me to work next to him?" Oh, come on, that was a bigger laugh than that. But bottom line is, when we had a massive change from feudalism to capitalism, it took hundreds of years. In fact, it's still working its way through. Today, it's all happening, and it's all happening at once. It's happening at real time, and Wolf Blitzer is telling us it's a global crisis by 6 p.m. But there's light at the end of the tunnel, and honestly, Gen Z and millennials, you're the light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. You can't leave. I'm just getting warmed up here. Yeah. Do you want me to do that? Oh, more than a couple, sure. Yes.
How is the data gathered?
Good question. How's the data gathered? Some still use a traditional telephone. method, but 70% of the calls have to be to cell phones. I find that problematic, although I still do. Sometimes you have to do a telephone survey. But mainly what I have is a panel of 15 million to 16 million American adults who have agreed to participate in surveys, and we draw random samplings of about 10,000 of those names, random and stratified. So they're not just picked, but they're picked by region, so we already have a representativeness to it. We collect the data, and then we apply weights if we need to. Yeah, we ask. We capture emails. And then extend an invitation. And now, importantly, with 15 to 16 million, most of our folks may take 2 or 3 surveys a year. So it's not one of those professional, survey takers out there. Does that help?
If you have a question, please raise your hand. We'd like to get a microphone to you so that they can hear this online.
Okay, let him have one follow-up, and then we'll go.
So, are the only people that you call on the phone the people that have agreed to be called?
Not call on the phone. Calling on the phone is something where either we take all the listed numbers in the United States and draw a random sampling from that, or the more difficult way is to do area codes and 3-digit exchanges and then scramble the last 4 digits, in which case then you get response rates that are infinitesimal. We'll get 20% response rates going online. Yes?
I think you teased ideas about how to deal with the fact that both sides are now not thinking of the election as a legitimate. Do you have ideas for what we can do about allowing the American public to actually get back to the point where we accept elections?
That's a very, very good question. And for starters, one of the ways not to do it is to have establishment figures or Hollywood figures, for that matter, say, this is a legitimate election. This is an era where we distrust, except if you're Taylor Swift. There's We Mortals, that's our playbook, and then there's Taylor, okay, and she works. But no, with that said, it has to be a blowout. And I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to suggest to you, I think, and this is a hunch only, I think the model here is going to be 2012. It's going to stay close until the very end, the weekend, and then the tide is going to come in huge. Tidal wave. One way or another, that's what I can't figure out. Are people going to wake up in the morning and say, the prices of everything are still crazy? Folks are starting to lose their jobs. Crime, the perception. I mean, the numbers are good, but the perception is bad. The whole world is going to hell in a handbasket, and besides, it's not my white America anymore. And we're a laughingstock. Or young women are going to wake up and say, my reproductive rights and my rights in general are in real jeopardy. We haven't done anything meaningful on global warming, and it will get worse under him. And I haven't figured out what, but I do think it's not going to be close on Election Day. And if it isn't close on Election Day, then you have a much better chance then of doing some healing. Yes? Right up here. Okay, yeah, you call it.
So when you're talking about
Where are you?
margin, right here,
Okay, sorry. Okay.
margin of error,
Yeah.
is that error on the part of the responder, error on the part of data collection? What is margin of error?
It's margin of sampling error, essentially. And there's a formula for it, but basically it's that, first of all, you're dealing with human beings, not just data. But secondly, when you're drawing your sample, there are possibilities that your sample could be contaminated, that you have a response rate that's higher among certain groups than other groups, that your standard deviation per question, instead of, so the average is 4, but, there were too many 8s and too many 0s, and it averaged at 4 as opposed to being clustered in between. There are multiple sources, but that's not the only source of errors in our surveys. We don't poll numbers. We poll people. And understand that people are complicated. They have memories. We don't know what dredges up those memories. Their views may be different on a Tuesday than they are on a Thursday. Yes? Okay, yep. Hey.
Hi, John. Nice
Hi.
to see you again.
Good to see you too.
I think 52% of the voters are female, or somewhere in that
Generally,
neighborhood.
that's how it comes
So
out.
what do you see as that trend line? We've heard so much discussion about reproductive rights and the Dodd decision. What do you see in that trend line over the last, say, 5 or 6 weeks?
Well, what we're seeing is that the gender gap between male and female is growing. And so, the old book, Men Are From Mars, Women From Venus, well, that's very true. On that issue alone, we're seeing a huge gender gap, but we're also seeing it on other issues as well. The important thing is, number one, Democrats have won every state and local election where reproductive rights have been on the ballot. And secondly, and I'm going to have to remember where I was going with it, but that's all right. Yeah, there is a number 2, though. But it's going to be a question of mobilizing. I think that we've seen that voters 45 and older have made up their minds and are solid. Those who are undecided probably are just not going to vote at this stage. But it's younger voters, particularly younger women voters, who have to decide, is this the most important issue? And I think they may very well. Yes, hi.
Hi.
Hello again.
Hello. So my question is, with the different polling sources / websites, do you feel like there is, I don't know, I forgot what exactly you said, but you mentioned a little bit about some polling sites having a little bit more bias.
Yeah.
And how they do their polls, some of them getting more of from a Democratic side compared to a Republican side.
I started noticing in 2020, and then particularly in 2022, and now I'm seeing it again this year, that you will have, pollsters like YouGov and Ipsos, legitimate pollsters who are independent also, and they will show a trend line towards Kamala Harris. And then, snap of a finger, Trafalgar, Remington, Insider Advantage, all with R's in parentheses after their name, showing a Trump advantage. And it has made me very suspicious, because you can go to the bank on it, that as soon as it appears to be going one way, bam, they go in and it skews the average. Now, by the same token, I have problems with Ipsos and YouGov because I think they oversample Democrats anyway and undersample Republicans. So I apply a weight for party. And it's not much of a weight, but I'm basing my judgments on 36% Democrat, 36% Republican, and that's normally how my raw data comes in anyway, especially after I do other weights, like for age and race. You always get an undersample of younger voters and black and Hispanic voters. But when I see some of these polls come out and actually publish, 42% Democrat, 28% Republican, that is not the United States of America. And you take a drive 15 miles out of any major metropolitan area in this country, and it's Trump-Vance, Trump-Vance, just as it was dump Hillary and dump Cuomo back in the 90s. You know, there's a lot of insularity, and there's a lot of insularity, I think, among my fellow pollsters. That's why I stay in Utica. Plus, the beer is pretty good, I have to say. The beer is all right. Yes, way up.
So my question is, when you're collecting data for your samples, do you, for like, for example, if you're collecting from like a group of women and you want to know how like they're gonna vote in the upcoming election, do you take into account like their religion, their race, their like how they identify, and how does that affect how you like create the poll or like adjust the sample to that?
You know, absolutely. Now, in a normal national poll, for example, we can't rebuild a model from the bottom up. And so if we have a proper balance of male and female, we should approximate that they're represented by race and religion. But no, and I've tried this over the years. You can't take a normal poll and then say, oh, here's women, let me look at the women in this poll. Oh, well, we have to bump up the number of Latinas, we have to bump up the number of I don't think you can rebuild a poll from the bottom up. However, the poll is designed, A, to get an overall national reading, but then B, to get a good idea of what's happening among various subgroups like men and women. If your sample is large enough, 1,800, 2,000, 2,500, you can do red-headed, freckle-faced Protestant women who don't go to church. But if it's at 1,000, you can't do that. Was that a completely useless answer, or do you?
No.
Hi, go ahead.
Hi. Have you seen any information in any polling yet that you would consider significant about the number of people that won't be voting? Because I've heard a lot of people, especially brought up Gaza, or voting third party, or just, not voting at all. Is that going to be significant?
Yeah, and it's particularly among young people, particularly among poor people. That's standard. But this time around, there are those who are so jaded by Gaza. Now, inflation and concern about the future and reproductive rights and the Dobbs decision certainly can factor in, but Gaza is one of the defining issues, because what it does is it underscores a fundamental distrust that younger voters already have, that how can you allow this to happen?
So I have two questions. One of them is, since the voting polls and all that, right, are the polls that you send out to people the same every single election cycle? And two, has there ever been a time, well, of course there has been time, but which time have you seen and heard about something similar to Gaza affecting the voters' mentality?
Okay, so first of all, no, we don't poll the same people. Now, there have been times when we've created a panel and gone back to the panel to see if it's moved. We have done panels of undecided voters, which is usually telling, or independent voters, and getting a handle not only how they're going to vote, but who they are and what their profile is. And you see the profiles change. I mean, one of the great misnomers in polling is independent, because it's always an eclectic group of people. Your second question, Gaza? Oh, well, yes. For those who could vote during Vietnam, it certainly was, a big and an important issue. Other than that, and interestingly, for those 18 to 20-year-olds who voted for the first time in 1972, and I was one of them, what was particularly staggering was that Nixon actually got more votes than McGovern among that group of people. But it was Vietnam as a wedge issue. Okay? Hi,
Hi.
from lunch.
Yeah. My question to you is, has your pollster or any other major pollster to your knowledge been the victim of a cyber attack? And my second question is, how does cyber terrorism affect modern elections, in your opinion?
Oh boy, I can't. I guess we're going to find out, and that is a particular worry. Deep fakes that we're seeing already. How deep, how persuasive are they? We're going to be looking at this forever. Victim of cyber attacks, our company bank account has been numerous times, and it's very troubling when we send out an invoice and then someone else, unbeknownst to us, creates an email that's very close to ours and says, no, don't follow those directions, deposit the check ACH into this account. And fortunately, some people have not followed that direction, but now that's included in all of our invoices. But in terms of data, I'm waiting. But we have to carefully monitor our data as it comes in. It's no longer one of those issues where it comes in and then we tabulate it all at the end. No, it's watched. Looking for speeders, those who answer the survey, a 50-question survey in 30 seconds. And then those surveys that might come in with exact similar results on every question. Thank you very much.
Yes, Doug.
I will see you all in 2034. Oh, thank you.